Hi everyone, this is Heather Cox. I'm going to walk you through my lesson plan project. First, I'm going to start with the standards that were used. It was for a kindergarten classroom in Cherokee County. It is not my classroom, but it was one that I borrowed for the project. It focused highly on student collaboration, being able to work in groups, and being able to produce something that was done with those collaborative pieces of technology. So the tools that we used to make that happen started with the first tool of Plickers. The students voted on both the book they wanted to read first and then subsequently the book that was their favorite. This was their first time using Plickers, so it was a great success, and they were very excited to see the difference between the favorite ahead of time and the favorite afterwards. Once we investigated the author's website, the author we were planning to Skype with, we created questions, and you can see those questions here. It was on a blog page, and the students indicated what they wanted to ask the author. So they gave their name and then they wrote their questions. You can tell that some required some additional teacher support and some were directly from the students. On the day of the Skype, we chose to use regular Skype as opposed to Skype for Business because being that I was in a Cherokee County school and I do not have an account there, I wanted to make sure that the network didn't block my Skype for Business, and I used a hotspot in order to access Skype and call the author directly. Afterwards, the students used two different apps to produce a digital project explaining about the Skype. So their first choice was Telegami, creating an avatar about themselves to share what they liked about the book and what was their favorite. They also had the option of using Chatterpix Kids, which lets them take a picture and draw a mouth and add a voice to it. And very quickly, I will show you just a couple of their final projects so you can see what they did.
Is that you go party in the neighborhood. Favorite book is mine, how she's a good dancer, and I love how she dances.
So you can see that each of the kids had an opportunity to share and talk about what they wanted to do. Differentiation was somewhat difficult for me only because I do not know these students other than my daughter who happens to be in the class. And so to differentiate, I focus mainly on choice and voice. I allowed the students to make selections about which books they wanted to hear first, and then I allowed them to make selections about which tool they wanted to use in order to demonstrate their learning. The communication and collaboration issues were addressed both in using the blog so that their writing was visible outside of their classroom, as well as communicating and collaborating with Skype. And the students were assessed with a very simple rubric because the kindergarten standards, like I mentioned, tend to be fairly social. And also I wanted to make sure that the rubric itself was one that the students could read with little to no support. And it focused on the areas of speaking, content, and teamwork, which are all aspects of the standards put into student-friendly language. If somebody else were to try and do this lesson, my largest recommendation would be to prep heavily on the front end. Once everything is prepared, it is much easier to make happen. When it is not your class or they are not your students, it adds another layer of difficulty because I was unable to know a lot of things about the situation going into the classroom. And so I had to be incredibly flexible and rely heavily on some of the things that the teacher had shared with me and then my past work in a classroom. And so I knew there were certain things that I had to prep for, like I mentioned, the network. I didn't want to worry about that. So I brought a hotspot in. I brought iPads that already had the apps needed for creation so that I wouldn't have to worry about getting those. I also made sure that all of my questions were prepped in Plickers ahead of time and that I had prepared all of the materials because otherwise there were lots of places where the lesson could have fallen apart. I definitely learned quite a bit having to work with a bunch of students that I was not familiar with, but I certainly would absolutely love to do it again. And it was an incredible learning experience, even though I've done Skype lessons many times before.